G'day, Alex Carey here. The Goodwee ESA all-in-one home storage solution is here, and it's a game changer. It's packed with market-leading features, full home backup and 6-level battery protection. With up to 48 kilowatt hours in a single stack, the ESA is a breeze to install with no gateway needed. The Goodwee ESA series is available now and priced to cover the 2026 drop in the rebate. Visit goodwee.com.au for more information.
You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's editor Giles Parkinson and leading energy analyst David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Evergen, providing cutting-edge energy management software for battery optimisation, virtual power plants and distributed energy resources. And Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Energy Insiders podcast for the year. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy and editor and founder of its sister site, the EV Focus sister site, The Driven. And joining me, as he has almost every episode, I think every episode this year, and for the last 6 or 7 years, I'm ITK Principal David Leach. David, I trust you are well.
Bit better than that cough indicates, Giles. And we were going to have Chris Bowen on as guest this week, but unfortunately cabinet events have overtaken us, and I regret that. And it hasn't been the world's best week, has it?
I mean, it's sort of a bit outside our wheelhouse, but clearly the horrific events in Bondi last week have changed a lot of things for a lot of people. Quite clearly, a lot of members from the energy and renewables community have been directly and indirectly affected by those events, and we wish them all the best. There's been some fine speeches made about the need for understanding and togetherness, and I guess we might just leave it at that, have to underline our horror of those events, and wishing the best for all those people, and hopefully people can rest, recover, and recoup over the holiday break. And that has caused a lot of changes, to a lot of people's agendas over the last week and the forthcoming weeks. But
Indeed, I won't say too much more, except that it's been cause for me to reflect very deeply, and of course to share a lot of the sentiments that the Governor-General expressed so well yesterday. I'll just leave it at that.
A special guest for this week's episode. We're going to have to sort of riff on our own. But look, it's been a bit of a busy end of the year, despite everything that's been going on around us. As predicted, we finally got some wind energy contracts. Waddy Wind Farm over in Western Australia was the first to get financial close in 2025, closely followed by Palmer Wind Farm, the Carmody Hill Wind Farm from Our Energy. Palmer, we also expect possibly before the end of the year. I think some lawyers are just tying up some loose ends and possibly some others. Vestas announced another 205 megawatt contract. We don't know which wind farm that is. I've been trying to wrap my brain and I can't find out which. And I guess that's looking like things are starting to turn maybe for the better. Perhaps wind costs are peaking and coming down. Perhaps some finance has been deployed. You have done a very big and good analysis of the task in front of the New South Wales government, helped ironically by the fact that the Queensland government's rowing backwards very quickly.
Yes, so I think it is a big year next year for wind energy and indeed renewable developers of all sorts in 2026, but I expect it to be a slow start and a fast finish. We'll have to just wait and see. There's not much point speculating. I've written what I think, and we'll have to wait and see what developments do occur. It was also a year more generally, I suppose, where we saw progress on the EV front, Giles, but I had been planning to ask Chris Bowen about this, but I wonder if we have a consistent enough and broad enough EV policy across the country. The novated leases have certainly been very successful, but obviously only accessible to a minority of people. policies that have worked in other countries like Norway, which has 95% EVs, and China, which is up to 50%, often focus on creating demand pools, things like toll road, preferred access for EVs, like on harbour bridge lanes, and more generally some sort of registration discounts, things that make it more interesting for the average consumer. I won't spend too much more time, but I do think there's a kind of some people in, I think, the Labor Party more than others, and also across the political spectrum, tend to think of EVs as elitist because they're expensive. And I think a policy that broadly encouraged the average motorist to think about them more heavily wouldn't do any harm at all. But anyway, that's a little almost outside the
There's this, I think the EV industry in Australia suffers from a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and misunderstanding about what EVs are and what they can do and where you can go with them. I've just driven down from Byron Bay to Sydney for Christmas, and just before leaving, I sort of dialed in where I needed to charge on the way down, how long I needed to charge, and the answer was 35 minutes in total. Barely enough time to sort of stop and have a cup of coffee and go to the loo.
So I drove 1,100 kilometres from Sydney up to the Sunshine Coast last Friday, and drove back again on Monday, and that was a 2-stop trip each way. So I've got no doubt it can be done. But Giles, if we go on Boxing Day, or New Year's Eve or something, every charging station will be absolutely full. But anyway, that's we're not here to talk about our entitled problems. I just wanted to say that there's a lot of work to be done on EVs still, and I would like to see a broader consensus about doing that, because it's a big area of carbon emissions. It's a big area for Australia when Chinese EVs are very cheap at the moment and we don't have a car industry. There's no reason at all why we shouldn't go as hard as anything on it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to sort of contest some of those statements that Toby, those wild and statements that you made about charging. Look, there may well be queues at some charges, but we went through Coffs Harbour. Now, last year when we went through Coffs Harbour just before Christmas time, there were 6 charging stations open, or maybe there were 8 Tesla charging stations. Now there's 40. In Coffs Harbour alone. There's been an extraordinary amount of infrastructure that has been rolled out.
That's true.
We drove past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Tesla charging stations on the way down, stopped at 2 of them. Really no issues. Now, that's not the case on every route, but across the main routes, I think a lot has changed. And I think that's...
As I said, I've driven from Sydney to Horsham in Western Victoria, and Sydney to the Sunshine Coast in the last, 8 weeks. So that's pretty much the whole east coast of Australia, one way or another, and charging wasn't an issue. But anyway, that's enough of that. The other issue, I think, is, well, what have you learnt over this year, Giles? I think one of the things I most learnt was that negative prices we have for a lot of the time, but they're a lot less important than the 1% of the time that prices are over $1,000. And that's something that, whether the big increase in battery supply is going to mitigate that. I think you wrote recently that a number of coal generators were out in New South Wales on what was effectively the hottest December day that we've ever had. Yes, there were some 5-minute price spikes, but I think the overall spot price average for the day was under $300 from memory. And I thought that was a pretty good test.
It was a really interesting test, and we don't know too much about it yet, and I'd like to find out more. So what happened was that there were 4 units in New South Wales offline, so that's a third of the fleet. There was an LOR2 in place. I'm a bit confused about the LOR3. People like What Clarity said it had been called. I thought it had been advised. There's a possibility. I'm not too sure it actually came into effect. What AEMO did do was call on the Waratah Super Battery, the partially complete one, to stand in reserve, but it was never actually deployed because, lo and behold, all that demand was met. And as you point out, the prices were not reached. And what's really interesting is if you go onto the some of the platforms for Amber Energy. Now, these are the people who have household batteries or engaging in wholesale prices on a minute-by-minute basis. or 5-minute, trading basis, and they're actually looking at events like this and going, "Oh, look at that! We can make lots of money now." But it didn't, because the prices didn't go up as high as they might have thought. Some of them did make some money, but I would really like to know. I'm not too sure how to find out. We've seen more than 150,000, 170,000 household batteries installed over the last 6 months. To what extent is that now addressing some of the issues we're seeing in the evening peaks?
Well, but we've also got, in megawatt hours, a far bigger quantity of utility batteries, all of which needs to get a return.
Exactly.
And so they're inclined to be competitive. So, I mean, the point is, and during the day, we've got all this solar from rooftop that takes the stress out of the thermal generators that are left, and also, to the extent it's rooftop solar, takes the stress out of the transmission lines where a lot of the problems used to occur from sag and the heat and being overloaded. So despite the fact that you don't get a lot of wind typically on very hot days onshore, the fact is the system is showing itself to be quite resilient and coping well. So that's that, and I look forward to seeing more of that as we go forward. And as has been widely remarked, this year, 2026, was the year when we've actually seen a couple of months where coal supply has been less than 50% of total supply, and renewables have been more than 50%. Despite the fact that we haven't had a lot of new wind farms built. It was almost an early Christmas present in the sense that the McIntyre wind farm actually dared to go public and say it was making some progress. I had to have a Valium and a good lie down after I read that. But
well, it wasn't really public, actually. We actually just found that in a letter to stakeholders, and I don't think the media was supposed to know about that, but we found out anyway and decided to share the news. We did ask for more amplification from the owners of the McIntyre wind farm, but did not hear back.
So what's your other main learning from the year that we've just had, and wish list for the wish list for the year ahead, Giles?
Look, I think the household battery things has been really interesting. For me, that's been one of the most powerful, and battery storage just in general. Look, just in the last couple of days, we've had Neoen announcing start of construction of its Goyder battery, which is going to be the second biggest in South Australia, at least for a while. The first battery in the world, the first project in the world to deploy the new Tesla mega blocks, which is combining 3 or 4 megapack units into one, easily deliverable, balance the plant costs by about 40%, they say. And this comes after another 40% drop in sort of battery cell prices. Flow Power have just reached financial close on their first big battery. Neoen a couple of weeks ago announced a doubling of the Western Downs battery. Someone just pointed out today that more than 10 gigawatts of batteries have been energised in the Australian grid in the last year. So that's been the big change, I think. And I think people are now, we're starting to understand just how much that allows the green energy transition to proceed, not just in filling the sort of the gaps in bulk energy, but we've seen a lot of work and a lot of focus on the grid security aspect of it, which is things like inertia and system strength. And we're starting to see, as we discussed with Nicola Falcon from Australian Energy Market Operator a week or so ago, just how advanced they are now to moving on from synchronous machines and synchronous generators to inverter-based technology. So we're kind of at the cusp of the new world, if you like. And this is a major thing, because we had been moving along, talking about high levels of renewables without ever actually addressing that sort of detailed problem. And I thought that was your door. That was my door. I thought
it was my door, Giles. So I agree with all that. I also want to mention 2 things. One, which was just a seed being planted, which was, of course, vehicle to the grid. And the enormous potential, again, with a more comprehensive EV policy that could offer to Australians everywhere as a way of lowering electricity prices, and also the fuss around repowering smelters and whether industrial electricity prices in Australia are competitive. Now, I wrote a note about this. My opinion is that electricity industrial prices in Australia are not that bad by global standards. But they have gone up, it's true. And if we look at aluminium smelters, they've been subsidised. They got built with subsidies, and now, of course, they continue to need subsidies. And I think it's a serendipitous, can I say that word, type of thing that, in fact, it offers, the CIS has been, has shown that it probably has a kind of flaw, a difficulty, not just a floor price. It doesn't really create much demand pull in the same way that EV standards, like fuel efficiency standards, don't create demand pull. It might create a little bit of supply push. And so we really needed something to get the PPAs moving in New South Wales. And Snowy, if it is to be the provider of electricity to Tomago, we'll probably need something like an additional 3 gigawatts of supply. And that's great to get the PPA market going, a new source of PPAs in New South Wales. In other events, we also saw the sale of Alinta. I'm not sure what that means because I hate to cast ill of people, but it seems to me Jeff Dimery's gone a bit wilder and wilder as he's gone on in his career, and I see him recommending people like Chris Ullman. Honestly, it is a worry from one of our leaders, but nevertheless, Jeff's a very smart boy at the end, and I'm sure he'll be able to work out what's best for Alinta shareholders.
Yes, just on that point, I did actually talk to the Singapore people who are buying Alinta, and they seem very keen on keeping Loy Yang B open for as long as they possibly could, and even sort of flagged the idea that carbon capture was somehow feasible and price competitive and could guarantee or help their future, which I found very surprising.
As you know, Giles, I've been saying for years that, in fact, there is only one coal supply to Loy Yang A and Loy Yang B. And essentially the costs are Loy Yang A, as I understand it, charges Loy Yang B for its coal and receives revenue. If Loy Yang A closes, for sure Loy Yang B will be able to continue to mine all the coal and take over the coal mining, but it has to be the case that its fixed costs will go up very substantially from doing that. And anyway, time will tell whether that was a good acquisition from Loy Yang B's perspective, but I'd be prepared to bet with the owners it won't be going after 2040, and I'd be surprised if it's going after 2035, but that's just my opinion. What else have we learnt? I mean, I think we've really, they're probably the main things, aren't they?
Well, we've seen this extraordinary political pushback from the Queensland government.
Yes.
We've talked about this on many occasions. The scrapping of the renewable energy targets, the barriers put up on the planning requirements for wind and solar farms and now batteries, the calling in of some projects, in some cases sort of settled by a phone call from the head of Rio Tinto to say, you want that smelter to continue in Gladstone, then you better allow that wind and solar farm through. We've now seen them not endorsing the Nelson Review, which is probably something else we can talk about in a moment. We've had all the states agreeing, and now we've got Queensland saying, no, we don't endorse that. So
that's a worry. And I think also from Rio's perspective, I mean, it'd be nice to say, I saw that European Energy just got final environmental approval for its big solar farm up there, which has a contract with
Rio, yes, 1.1 gigawatts, Upper Calliope.
But progress on the Bungaban wind farm has to be seen, and the financing for that's, I think, got to be locked in as well. So that's another issue. And then I think just today, one of the reasons Chris Bowen couldn't be with us, I believe, is that the Cabinet announced its domestic gas reservation policy. I've been personally a great fan of gas prices being high. Gas consumption in Australia in the NEM has gone down from 700 petajoules to 500 petajoules. That's partly, perhaps even mainly, because we're using less gas-fired electricity around the country. But to a secondary reason is that various businesses that depended on cheap gas, various industrial businesses, have found Australia is no longer competitive. If you read and I've only just glanced through the headlines, it was only released today, the gas report, what you'll see is in there what everyone in the gas industry knows, that you can have a gas reservation policy, but it's not necessarily going to produce gas prices that are much lower than today. Even leaving aside the fact that the gas transmission pipeline from Victoria to New South Wales is full and there are difficulties with gas transmission from Queensland to New South Wales, the fact is that the reserves that we know about that can be developed are going to be expensive to develop. And so I don't see domestic gas prices falling very much. I think myself, the government would do well. It's another area of policy to continue to focus on process heat, electrification, and that would free up gas for other uses. So, the bottom line here is gas is a big contributor to global warming. The third biggest contributor, it's one of the steadiest growing contributors, and we need to rein in gas use ultimately. I get that gas is important for a lot of reasons and a lot of processes, and that transitioning away from gas is hard and more difficult than decarbonising electricity production, but still we have to bear the long-term goal in mind.
Yeah, look, and I think you're right. And I just noted that reservation policy applies only to new contracts, not existing ones. So that in itself is interesting. I think the government had to be seen to be doing something. And as you say, look, I don't actually think there's any way of lowering gas prices, because as long as the cost of producing gas is expensive, there's no way you're going to get a discount on the supply without a sort of a direct subsidy from the government to the gas suppliers, and that would be extraordinary if they did that.
And goodness knows the government's got enough subsidies going on at the moment, hasn't it?
That's
really?
Exactly right. Yeah. Hey, what was interesting was there's two states that really fascinate me in this transition. I mean, look, there's Queensland. Well, look, there's a lot of states that fascinate me, really. I mean, there's Queensland because of the LNP government, and they're just bloody mindedness, and they're determined to destroy everything.
I mean, I have to say it. You've said it all, but I feel sorry for the many Queenslanders who would have a different view. And I think, it's very backward looking. It's just trying to go back to a world that doesn't exist. And this is the perpetual failing of all but the most forward-looking of conservative parties. They're always trying to go backwards instead of forwards. And in electricity and decarbonisation, it's not possible. Here in Sydney, we've just lived through the hottest December day we've ever had. The only thing we know for sure is that in 10 years' time, it's going to be hotter still. You have to think about the future of the coal industry when the world is going to want less of it, and not,
Yeah.
But anyway, that's for them to work out.
Then you've got New South Wales, which is still sort of wrestling with the closure of the biggest coal fleet and a much older coal fleet than in Queensland. But the two states that really fascinate me are South Australia and Western Australia. And Western Australia just put out their gas statement of opportunities last week. And it's interesting, this is an isolated grid, the biggest isolated grid in the world, peak demand of more than 4.4 gigawatts, been pretty slow in rolling out large-scale wind and solar over the last decade or so. There was a burst of activity a few years ago. There seems to be another one now where there's a whole bunch of new projects being built, the Warradage expansion, the Waddi wind farm we mentioned at the start. Kings Rock has started construction as well. But what was really interesting about this gas statement of opportunities from AEMO was the forecast that the state is going to get rid of its last coal-fired power stations into this decade. It is the state with the biggest share of gas generation in its power network. It's about 30%. It has been pretty much that for the last few years. But after coal shuts down, there's going to be a brief spike in gas, very brief, about 6 months or a year. And then assuming that all these wind and solar projects get built and the battery storage, which displaces gas and peaking demand and is already accounting for up to 30% of demand on some evenings, gas just falls away really quickly. So this is the biggest isolated grid in the world, doesn't depend on imports or exports, doesn't have pumped hydro or other long duration storage that we've seen so far. And yet you've got gas going from being the major provider, even after the closure of coal, to being a very minor player and heading towards 90% renewables in a grid and in a manner which too many people still think is impossible.
And South Australia?
Well, that's really interesting because in 2 years' time, it's going to be at 100% net renewables. It is featuring already. It'll be the first grid in 2 years' time to run with no spinning machines, engines off, effectively. I'm really looking forward to seeing the work of AEMO next year in conducting a trial of a 100 megawatt grid or isolated grid with no synchronous generation, no spinning machines.
I've long thought, Giles, that there are just no technical issues about that. I don't know why I think that, because I'm not a power engineer, but just all the reading I've done, I've always been relaxed about an inverter, 100% inverter grid, rightly or wrongly. But what I do think we need to note is that where people will look at this in South Australia and say, so what? Prices are still very high.
That's right. And there's a reason for that. Historically, they've been very high. Historically, it's got a huge network for a small population. That's very hard to reduce. It is still dependent on 25% gas, and that's too high. That allows gas to set the prices, particularly in those periods where there was scarcity in the market. And as you alluded to at the start of this, when you're talking about the effect of high price events and negative prices, it's the high price events which have the impact. So you only need one or two of those in a quarter to set the whole average up by about $20 or $30 a megawatt hour.
I think that was my personal main learning as an analyst in the 12 months that's gone. And as you would know, I think everyone else has long thought that provided we have enough diversity in the ownership of the batteries, that as the battery supply increases, it will tend to compete with gas at that peak hour. So the reason why gas sets prices is because it's a matter of supply and demand at each individual half hour of the day. And so in the middle of the day, of course, there's an abundance of supply and price is low. But in the evening, there is not an abundance of supply, and so prices are higher. So it's getting more supply competing to be dispatched into those peak times when traditionally supply has been lower. That will reduce overall prices, reduce price volatility in the long run, reduce price spikes, and ensure that consumers get a better deal and generators earn a fair return. And economics 101 will all live in that world, as if.
Well, let's hope. Look, the other big thing that emerged this year, I think, has been the rise of solar hybrids. They've been dominating the capacity investment scheme auctions. They play a large part of Rio Tinto's plans for Gladstone. We've seen the first one operate in Western Australia at Conundrum, which has been really interesting, just seeing sort of solar from that particular facility sort of ease off in the evening, as it does for all sort of farms. It come back at dinner time and stays around till midnight and sometimes goes through all through the night. The first solar hybrid in the national electricity market, the main grid, has just been energised just near Parkes. That's the Corn Park one, owned by Potentia Energy. But there's about 2 or 3 dozen more, much bigger ones, coming into the market. So that's going to be another interesting...
Yes, they share the transmission line and that improves their costs. I think another thing that we should note this year, and a consequence of the REC scheme not being extended, is the collapse in REC prices. And I think that will actually cause... a lot of these PPAs that early year solar farms and even wind farms had included the REC price as a component of that. And those PPAs typically last, 5, 7, even 10 years, but they expire. For instance, I think Stockyard Hill PPA, just to pick a big one, expires around 2030. So that's still a few years away, but there's a lot of others that will expire in the next couple of years. And when they go to recontract, they won't be able to access that REC price anymore. So the lenders to those businesses will and the equity owners will be thinking hard. Another thing I think we're going to see, Giles, just while I'm on, is what happens in all these industries. You start out with, I think we used to describe them as, in the stockbroking cynical industry, there were 2 kinds. There were cowboys and
stockbroking cynical. I can't believe it.
There were cowboys and punters. But, the industry often starts out with a lot of people developing individual small projects, getting money, optimistic forecasts, and then, in reality, life turns out to be a lot tougher. And eventually the industry consolidates around a few big groups. And so I don't know that we've seen that so much yet. We've seen a lot of assets that are for sale one way or another at the bigger end of town. And what we've yet to see is how the industry structure is going to shake out in that. We know that AGL and Origin and Energy Australia don't really want to deploy their capital there. Goodness knows they want to deploy capital into batteries and things like that. But someone is going to end up owning all of this infrastructure. And one of the things I was talking about in my note today is that eventually, as soon as you own one wind farm, you want to own a battery to go with it, as you talked about a hybrid, and then you want to add a solar farm in, and pretty soon you're competing with your Origins and AGLs. And I think we've yet to see how that shakes out in the medium term, but I think over the next 3 to 5 years, and probably starting next year, we'll start to see some movement in that direction.
And the big issue for the AGL, the Energy Australias, the Origins, and I guess Snowy Hydro as well, is what the retail market looks like in sort of 5 years' time. And I don't think they've really got an idea of how to get a handle on that. You're now seeing the battery rebate scheme has been expanded, an extra $5 billion added to the cost of that scheme. They're saying it's a saving. It's interesting what's happened there. Basically, the market was sort of flooded by some really cheap and big batteries, and that was getting ridiculous, getting 40 kilowatt hour, 50 kilowatt hour batteries.
What happened? There's that, and it was politically very popular, right? People liked it, So of course
people still like it. That's why it's been extended. That's right, yeah. But they did have to sort of manage the prices, and it was getting it was a bit silly, some of the size of the batteries that were being installed. But anyway, so there's going to be 2 million of these houses now, with household batteries in, and I don't know what that looks like for the energy retailer. I've just got a battery in 2 weeks ago. We have not imported a single kilowatt hour from the grid in that time, and I doubt that we will. And,
no, but I think I saw an email from Renew Economy, not even one I'd necessarily asked for, but
what was it? It was
talking about flow power, offering 45 cents. So it was for peak hour supply.
Happy hour solar, they said. I think it's something
yes.
like that.
So it's quite interesting to me, but I think your point is very well made that operational supply to households is not going to be a growth business. AEMO showed that in the ISP. You and I have been talking about it for years, and the home battery scheme has just made that even more obvious. So it is a question about the models that the big gentailers are going to use. We haven't seen the full workings out of that yet.
Yeah, look, I remember asking the then CEO of one of the big four retailers at the Paris Climate Conference about what the what the business model look forward in the future, and he said he didn't know, and he got really pissed off when I quoted him saying that. But 10 years later, they still don't know, I don't think. And I don't think
anyone's. You're going to have EV charging. I think it's going to move from households being the buyers to households being more suppliers, and the gentailers having to buy and sell, and there'll be.
Does that mean they have to be nice to us?
They'll have to. No, they won't have. They'll still have all the. They'll still be a lot bigger than you, Giles. But there'll be a lot more sort of service arrangements in it. It'll be electricity as a service. They'll be helping to service you. Both buy and sell power, and inevitably there'll be a kind of more of a fixed cost of that service. There just has to be, I think, overall.
Well, it's really interesting, actually. We're kind of looking around for a new supplier, and we're sort of, contemplating. We're actually going to sit down and just sort of watch what the new battery does for us over the next couple of months before deciding what to do. But it's not as though the retailers are sort of tripping over themselves to welcome us into their fold. In fact, some of them made it very clear that we don't actually want you because you're no use to us.
Yes, no, that's right. How big a battery did you get, just by the way?
Well, not a huge one, 24 kilowatt hours, but I mean, look, it's big enough.
It's the equivalent of 2 power walls. Up until 6 months ago, it would have been regarded as pretty big, Giles. Let's be honest. No wonder you haven't bought anything from the bloody grid.
Well, we've got 2 EVs that we're charging, so we keep it busy.
Yes,
we keep it occupied. Now, what was it?
And how much solar, Giles?
Just under 9 kilowatts.
Yes.
So it's a reasonably sized system now. So
yes.
I guess we'll find out in winter how adequate it is.
I didn't know you had winter in Byron Bay, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, we get cloudy days, put it that way. So,
Charles, we're drifting off the topic, but it is interesting because my situation is not incredibly different to yours, and AGL's just told me I have to go onto a new contract very regrettably. So I might end up actually having to pay an electricity bill,
Well, what are they doing today? This is interesting, David. This is interesting.
Well, it's not that interesting.
Yes,
I haven't even had time to look at it. Too many other things going on, and I don't want it. But I mean,
No, but this is it. I mean, everyone has an electricity bill, David. Well, they might have a bill, but they have a supplier. I mean, this is on everyone's minds. What do you do? Who will accept me? Which family can I be a part of now?
I don't know the answer, so I won't talk about it anymore. Just it's a question that has emerged. Now, is there anything else?
The Nelson review.
Yes,
out last week. Not a huge lot of surprises. Not a huge difference. Still a lot of details to be worked out, as far as I can tell. This eSIM product that they're proposing.
It's hard to get excited about, to be honest, Charles. I mean, I don't know what you think, but I can't get excited just yet.
Well, it gets to the stage where it really is for one of the wonks, the policy people and the financial wonks and things like that. So that's more you than me, David. So if you can't get you're excited about it, then I can't. But I like the fact that someone's actually sat down and done a pretty thorough job. And even if not everyone agrees with the actual fine details of what they've done, they've actually been commissioned to go out there, think about this pretty hard for a year, and it looks like they've come back with a reasonable product. Now, whether it works or not, I'm not really too sure. Time will tell. But the fact that they've gone out and thought about it and produced it, and we actually have a potential plan to go forward beyond 2027, which is when this is designed for, I think is a good thing.
No, that's right. We also had the GenCost report. I can't recall if we talked about that last week, but I don't think that will have surprised anyone, particularly, except it did note that wind costs, domestic wind costs, are probably tending to come down a bit. The solar costs were, or at least stabilised. And the solar costs are a little higher than ITK models, that's me, ourselves, or historically so. And the battery costs are coming down. It's not, you mentioned earlier, cell costs. I don't actually think it is so much around cell costs. I think it's an awful lot about, firstly, supply competition, and secondly, as we've discussed on the podcast quite a bit, pack density. It's just packing more megawatt hours, 6 megawatt hours into a container. And some records are still being set about that. And in fact, the containers have got so heavy, you have to actually modularize them into 3 mini containers and then screw them together when they land. So again, we've had a tremendous amount of battery cost reduction, and the natural tendency is always to keep forecasting that going on forever. But as we've seen in wind and solar, that it's very easy to overshoot in markets as well. And were I a battery developer, I personally would not necessarily be counting on battery costs continuing to fall at the same rate that they have in the past few years.
Yes, and just on battery density, I mean, just talking about the household battery that I had installed a couple of weeks ago, it was about the same size as the original first Powerwall that was introduced about sort of 7, 8, 9 years ago in Australia. So that's how much the density has improved. The other thing we'll be looking out for, I think, is in the new year is the report. Look, it's a political document, but it is actually quite important. This is on the Senate committee looking at information integrity around climate and energy, because I think misinformation and disinformation do rank as some of the biggest hurdles that we have in the Australian transition, be it on EVs, be it on battery storage and the transition to renewables, and combating that, or at least being aware of that, is crucially important. As I wrote in a piece this week about the submission that was made against me. Apparently, David, I'm a successful global funds manager. I'm 40 years old and I've got a full head of hair, which I just like to sort of disprove right now. Someone only had to check my LinkedIn profile. But look, that's just the level of misinformation, but it is a absolutely critical part. It's used and abused by the Conservatives, the fossil fuel industry. It's official policy now for the US government, who are eradicating now the...
I don't think facts have got much to do with the US government, Giles, and I'm not sure an Australian website's going to really change the way they present stuff. But along the same theme, I've advocated in this podcast and in writing that I think the government could do more about energy prices to show where we are globally. I think if we can, there's a lot of stuff written about how much electricity prices have gone up, whereas when you look into the CPI data, as far as I can tell, and allowing for federal rebates and things like that, I don't really think that electricity prices have gone up over the past decade. More than the CPI. Now, it's certainly true that industrial gas prices have gone up a massive amount, but again, they're almost definitionally still less than export parity. The government report today says that export parity for gas is around Aussie $16, and you're still only paying like $13 if you're an industrial in Australia. Global industrial electricity prices, for the most part, other than in, say, Texas, are higher than in Australia or very comparable. And so I think the government itself could make that information clear. For instance, one of the other things, and we're running out, there's so many things, but we have to wind it up, is that the talk about the growth in data centres that we're going to have here in Australia. Now, we wouldn't be having data centres come into Australia if the electricity industry was going to be uncompetitive, particularly once you get over, say, a 100 megawatt data centre, and it's one that's trying to train a large language model. At that level, the power cost becomes, the big driver of costs, along with depreciation. Why depreciation? Because these things are full of computers, and the computers only last for a few years before someone comes out with a better one. You may not have seen that, Giles, but a number of us have.
Thank you, David.
Almost like EVs, isn't it? Really? So I think it's an indication that Australia's electricity is actually still quite competitive, and it's getting green quite fast, as we're talking about. And so we are an attractive country for investment from an electricity perspective. And I think the government could do more to actually provide the data to show what some of us already know to be the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And also sort of point out that some of the European electricity prices are distorted by general taxes and rebates of their own. I mean, the French government, the French retail prices are heavily subsidised, up to $40 billion in 1 year in 2023. And yet the Danish and the German retail electricity prices are subjected to high levels of tax. So the Danish one had a 20% tax on it. That was just part of their own revenue general revenue decision. So not really much to do with the cost of energy there. So, anyway.
So, Giles, I think it's time to do a couple of thank yous. Of course, we want to thank our sponsors, and that we'll leave to you, but I would accept to say that I'm very grateful as well. But I also want to say thank you to listeners who, in general, often provide feedback that correct me when I go off course, which is rather more often than I would like. And also to note people like Rystad and particularly RenewMap and Global Roam, and I think Jeff Elridge. There's a lot of people out there that are providing a lot of data and I guess AEMO, which makes that a lot of that fundamental data available in a way that's better than in many other countries, I believe. And so enable us to good data means that better decisions get made, good analysis, lots of debate, and Australia keeps moving forward. So I'd like to say thanks to everyone who has helped me this year along that journey.
Well, thank you, David. And look, I'd just like to echo those thoughts. I'd like to thank specifically our sponsors, Evergen and Pylon, who has been sponsoring us for a few years now and continue to do so. And we thank them very much for our support. We do thank all the listeners. We'd like to thank the team behind producing this podcast, specifically Tanya and Sam, who I think has been doing the latest episodes and was doing the episodes beforehand. I also like to mention, too, the people anchoring the sister podcast, or the brother podcast, if you like. Sam on the Driven podcast is doing a fantastic job, had a fantastic interview with Illumina the other day on sort of rolling out EV networks, battery-supported EV networks in remote areas. And Delaney's done a fantastic job with the Switched on Australia podcast and electrification. And Sophie has been hosting the Solar Insiders podcast and having chats with Rachel Williamson and just sort of bringing some fascinating interviews from that side of the business. So just, between the 4 podcasts, I think we get to speak to a lot of different people, talk about a lot of different issues, and we recommend those podcasts if you haven't seen them. Just on Renew Economy, it's been another fantastic year. We've actually grown our email subscription list by, how many percentage? 30% in just in the last 12 months, from 21,000 to more than 28,000. That's partly because we finally got our shit together to actually promote our newsletter properly, but that's good that we actually got the response. We've had more than 26 million page views on the website. That's a record in this calendar year. So it has been sort of growing quite considerably, and that's pretty good for a niche publication. It's been around for almost 15 years now. So we just thank all our readers. And look, we put out another call out for support from our readers last week, and we really appreciate the generosity and the support that they give us. And it's important, I think, because of those issues around misinformation and disinformation, which I mentioned before, that we do get strong independent media properly funded, so we can do some proper journalism and get proper people who know proper things, like you, David, onto a podcast like this to discuss some of the issues. And look, I'd also like to thank some of the people that we've had on the podcast. It's been
our guests.
Our guests. It's been hard to sort of fit everybody in. A lot of people have wanted to come on the podcast. We're grateful for that. Chris Bone, we didn't get for this last episode, but we've had him on a couple of times this year already. We've had a couple of very senior CEOs and other state ministers and some leading thinkers as well. And it's just sort of great to get their point of view and the feedback from others.
And Giles, Chris Bowen said something on the first discussion I think we had with him, and I do try and listen. I don't always succeed, but I try and listen hard. And he talked about the future generations. And if I had a real Christmas wish, it's that our leaders, and, it's the leaders that make things happen, the CEOs of companies, the policy leaders, and whether they're politicians or within bureaucracies in the government, they're the people that drive how Australia is going to be in 3, 5, 10, 30 years. And, we are stewards of this country, if I can put it this way. All of us today, and it's our ambition to leave Australia and the world in as good as or even better place than what we came into it, and it's our leaders that make that happen. And so I would just like to wish them very well on that difficult journey.
And David, I think that's a very nice way to end the podcast for this episode and for the year. So look, thank you to you, David, for being with us all of the year and the years before and the years that may follow. So I think that's it for a call out. We'll be back sometime in January, not too sure when, but mid to late January, we'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. In the meantime, we wish everyone a peaceful, restful, reflective Christmas break and come back rebooted for the new year, and to think and speak kindly of each other. Bye for now.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Evergen, the market-leading renewable energy software business that optimises residential and commercial solar and battery systems. Evergen enables large numbers of systems to operate as a single fleet, so network operators can use them as a virtual power plant, generating significant value for consumers, network operators, and the energy system as a whole. Evergen software is powering the energy system of the future. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.